Hello, everyone. Happy Super Bowl Sunday. So, I'm seeing that several people have started discussing the Week 6 topic, and don't worry if you haven't posted yet. Week 6 isn't even officially upon us, not until tomorrow at least, so for Monday, February 12th. But I wanted to at least talk about some of the posts so far because that will help you if you listen to this short little screencast here. Hopefully, this will address some of those similar questions that you might have, and it'll allow you to either post on something different or ask a different question. Um, and hopefully, I can continue to kind of prepare you or at least address any anxieties when it comes to writing a paper. Now, one kind of common theme was related to how much stuff do we need to write, or how in depth do we need to go. So for your major assignment too, it's not going to be a lot. And a good example is from one of the papers posted. Here's something reviewing Mitchell et al., and it looks like it's about a paragraph. It could be potentially 2 paragraphs. Let me give you another example. And I think this would be a great way to go, especially, if you're doing a PICO that is comparing one intervention versus another intervention. So you could potentially get 1 to 3 paragraphs, probably better to get 2 to 3 for each of your 5 papers. For example, Brummett et al. Evaluated 2 dietary strategies for reducing LDL cholesterol in male adults. Subjects were randomized to a Mediterranean diet group or to the DASH diet group. Subjects received individual dietary instruction from a registered dietitian at baseline and had subsequent monthly check-ins with a certified health coach. The primary investigator and the registered dietitian were available during the course of the study to answer dietary questions from subjects via email or via Zoom teleconferencing. So right there, you get a general idea about it being a randomized controlled trial, what the interventions were, and what were the outcomes of interest. And you can see that that's pretty bare bones right there, and you could probably expand even further. Then the next paragraph, kind of the follow-up. How did the study turn out? After 1 year, subjects repeated baseline lab tests to assess cholesterol levels and A1C values. Both groups experienced significant decreases in LDLs, an increase in HDL, and a decrease in total cholesterol. Both groups also experienced statistically and clinically significant decreases in A1C levels. Now, I know I threw A1C in there. It wasn't part of the first paragraph. Hopefully you're getting the idea here that maybe the LDL cholesterol was part of my PICO, and I'm just in the second paragraph illustrating everything about the study. So I'm not holding back, because you'll find that sometimes you'll find that some studies, you may be interested in one thing, you may be interested in one outcome, but they're looking at several different outcomes. And so that could be interesting, and it could be something that you include. And we can always figure that out later. Like, it's always easier to cut than it is to add back in. And then the third paragraph, this is where you start to, you're able to start comparing and contrasting, right? So I can start highlighting here that there were some limitations, ... First, the compliance with the study was ... And maybe I should have mentioned in the first paragraph that subjects were required to keep a food diary journal. And then I can go on to my second thing, where second, while this study found positive improvements in ... it did not report ... So maybe my PICO was, I wanted to see male adults with a diagnosis of severe coronary artery disease as identified by a coronary calcium scan. And maybe this study showed decreases in LDL cholesterol, but didn't quite match my population. So you're able to, see now that you're able to get multiple paragraphs that way. Oh, sorry about that. Next up, looking at how would one ensure to establish a robust data collection strategy. I can imagine it would be somewhat difficult to ensure that patient population is exactly the same between papers. And that's very true. So you might have one study, go back to the LDL example, that maybe was looking at males with severe coronary artery disease, and maybe you've got another paper that's looking at females, but they're in their 30s and 40s. And so you're going to find these differences, these discrepancies. Well, does that mean that looking at the Mediterranean diet or the DASH diet, it would be a waste of time to consider the female population? Well, not necessarily. You might find that there's not a lot of papers, and so you've got to cast a little bit wider of a net. So it gets into then, okay, how well do you feel like your results are generalizable to a larger population? And so that gets into then, are you able to do a systematic review or are you able to do a scoping review? And so just, again, keep this in the back of your mind here. With a systematic review, we're trying to have as similar as possible the populations, but you're going to find that there's going to be some differences, and that's okay. There could be some things that are okay about that. You're also going to find that there may be some differences in different outcome measures, and that could potentially be fine too. And what I mean by that is maybe one paper looks at a particular health outcome, uses a different health outcome measure, whereas a different paper uses a different health outcome measure. They're both looking at different health outcome measures, changes based upon these pen and paper results, but maybe they're not exactly the same. Could it still be a systematic review? Yes, it could still be a systematic review because you would be talking about how the particular intervention had a positive impact upon health. But what if your populations are too different? And what if the outcomes are really different? Well, maybe the scoping review is the better choice. And we're not going to be talking about the systematic review and scoping review next week. We're going to look at experimental designs, but we will get to this soon. Right now, just focus on your 5 papers that you'll look at. Because again, think about this for your assignment number 2. This is a practice. This is a chance for you to work on how you're going to be expressing that review of the paper that gets all the information in there within a relatively short space, right? 3 paragraphs or so. Because again, if you look at those assignment number 2 examples, they're relatively short, 6 to 8 pages, double spaced. That doesn't include the references or the title page. All right, so this one here has a lot of questions in it, and so as we go through things, follow the arrow, and then I'll give the answers. First off here, what are the most important parts to include in the review? Well, hopefully I gave you some idea on that in the earlier slides. And again, it should all relate back to your PICO, right? Because that's what you're trying to look at with your dissertation here is, or are there studies that can answer your PICO for you? And then for your dissertation, you're going through the process of looking at all of the research that's out there. So you're doing this comprehensive dive into things. Now, is it important for you to write down the statistical numbers about findings? No, you don't need to be writing down p-value was less than 0.001. But it could be valuable to put in numbers that show changes. So, for example, if you were doing something with diabetes, if you could show that the intervention changed A1C levels from 12.5 to 5.8, that would be really meaningful to include in your paper. Now, Can you use articles that show a statistically significant finding to argue for or against your position? And yes, that would be a good thing, potentially. And let's say you had 8 papers that showed a statistically significant finding, but then 2 papers showed that there wasn't. Well, what would be interesting to know is how those studies match up. What if the statistically significant findings were in small populations that had significant threats to their internal validity with how the study was conducted? And the 2 studies that showed no significant findings, they were done on really large populations, and the internal validity looked great, and it matched up with your PICO. Well, that's really valuable information. Now, looking at how many articles to include that are general overview articles. So, your introductory paragraph is going to be about 1 or 2 paragraphs in length. Look at the examples. And this is kind of tying in a little bit with what I had you do with looking at the epidemiologic studies and the different epidemiologic designs. Let's say you're looking at a particular diagnosis and you want to illustrate the impact upon society. You may put information in there about the prevalence of that condition. Those would come from studies that wouldn't probably have anything to do with the treatment or the addressing the PICO part of your interest. There might be studies that you look at that report the financial impact upon society or the financial impact upon the individual. There may be studies that are more descriptive studies that talk about the impact upon the patient, how it affects them. Does it have an impact upon other aspects of their health? Does it interfere with their function, with their ability to do work? So, yes, and again, there's not really like, oh, you should make sure you have 5 of them. But again, you're wanting to tell a story. Why is it important for you to look at this patient population? And the last one here, wanted to know about people intubated. Okay, that kind of tied in with the one before. So, is it worth including an article that has no statistical significance in the literature review, but will still make its way into the article? And that answer is yes. That answer could be, again, going back to what I was just mentioning before about maybe they were those papers that report prevalence or financial related things, or maybe it was a study that, let's say for your assignment number 2, you've got 4 studies that show a statistical significance and the 5th one doesn't. Okay, great, include it. Why do you think that 5th one doesn't show it? Could it have been in those first 4 studies that they dosed the medication at a particular level, and in the other study they underdosed it? Or they had people take the medication 3 times a day and they only took it 1 time a day in the other study. So it's nice to be able to illustrate, kind of do the comparing and contrasting. All right, that's addressing some of those initial comments. And again, you don't have to be posting yet. Things don't officially start till tomorrow. Have a good one.